The phrase tombstone comes from the belief that people are the statue of mistakes. Many of the worst disasters of the history have been caused by human blunders. A typing fault, a design and communication mistake, or a minor mistake might result in you losing millions of dollars, not to mention human losses and environmental damage. If financial errors are connected, it will be much more difficult to recoup lost funds. In this video, we will discuss some most expensive mistakes in all history, and humans wasted millions of dollars for every mistake. But before we do that, please subscribe Unimaginable and hit the bell icon for more updates. Here are the 20 most expensive mistakes in all history. Number 20. The heavy submarine. In 2013, the Isaac Pearl was intended to be the first in a new generation of diesel-electric submarines when an expensive blunder caused to lengthy delays. It was discovered that the boat was 70 tons overweight because someone had accidentally put a decimal point in the wrong location early on in the planning process. Engineers were compelled to extend the sub even longer as a result of its weight. They were able to make it more buoyant by adding about 6 meters to the hull of submarine. Unfortunately, they still lost $11.4 million as a result of this error. Number 19. Apple founder sells shares. Back in the 1970s, there was a third founder behind Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, which many of us are familiar with. Ron Wayne designed the first Apple logo and wrote the Apple I manual, but tensions between him and Jobs caused him to sell his stock. Wayne had a 10% stake in Apple, which he sold for $800 in 1978. Had he kept those shares, they would be worth at least $35 million today. Fortunately, Wayne has accepted his decision and made peace with it. He told to the Daily Mail that he made a choice that allowed him to focus on what he wanted to do. He genuinely does not regret walking away at all. Number 18. Trains too wide for the rail. In 2014, French rail company SNCF procured 2,000 brand new trains for its lines in Paris and across France. Unfortunately, the trains were too large to fit into some of the older platforms in France. The error occurred because station measurements had been taken 30 years ago, but not those made 50 or more years prior when the trains were significantly narrower. To correct the error, construction was needed to widen the platforms at over 1,000 train stations in France. All told, fixing the mistake cost $68.4 million. Number 17. Crashing the Titanic. The Titanic was known as an unassailable ship before she sailed on her first voyage. It was the largest ocean liner of its time and was built especially for the long journey from England to America. Unfortunately, as we all know, the unsinkable reputation of the Titanic did not last long. The crew disregarded warnings of an iceberg ahead, which resulted in tragedy and death for many passengers on board the vessel. The whole right side of the Titanic scraped against the iceberg, causing it to sink swiftly. Because there were not enough lifeboats for everyone aboard, 1,517 people died in the accident. Construction cost of Titanic was $1.5 million, which is around $170 million today. Number 16. Mars Climate Orbiter lost. The Mars Climate Orbiter was a NASA spacecraft that was launched in 1998. It was supposed to orbit Mars and study its atmosphere and surface, but it vanished into space owing to a communication error. There were 2 teams working on the project, one in Colorado that worked with navigation data in metric units, and the other in California that worked with imperial measurements. They were unable to exchange the different units while attempting to put the craft into Mars orbit, resulting in their failure to reach the target, which cost $193 million. Number 15. Russia sold Alaska. Alaska was a Russian possession that was rapidly bleeding money in 1867. Russian merchants and officials had discovered some early financial victories there, but the demand for bigger salaries among officials was driving Alaska beyond its value despite newly discovered gold veins. For just $7.2 million, Russia sold Alaska to the United States. Alaska would eventually be worth more than Russia could have ever imagined. America has made back over $700 million on the deal thanks to its significant gold and oil industries. That is more than 100 times what we paid for the 49th state. Number 14. 3 Mile Island. On April 26, 1979, a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania suffered a catastrophe. A pressure valve in the reactor at 3 Mile Island malfunctioned, flooding the facilities with contaminated water. Meanwhile, the nuclear core came dangerously close to melting down. If a nuclear meltdown occurred, radiation would have leaked into the ground and exposed thousands of people to potentially harmful levels of contaminants. At one point, there was a huge hydrogen bubble in the plant, which many people feared would result in a total meltdown. Engineers were able to switch off the reactor and avert catastrophe. Controlling the radiation and preventing the meltdown was not simple. The 3 Mile Island disaster cost $839 million to repair. Number 13. Cerro Grande. Cerro Grande Fire of New Mexico remains the deadliest wildfire of the state, with over 1,000 structures destroyed. It began as a controlled burn in Bandelier National Monument, but was carried north, south, and east of its planned boundaries by strong winds. The blaze spread into the neighboring communities of Los Alamos and White Rock. The Cerro Grande fire consumed approximately 47,000 acres of New Mexico forest and damaged 280 residences. 18,000 residents were evacuated. Although the tragedy inflicted a significant loss on the people of New Mexico, with the money around $1 billion, the disaster taught valuable lessons about fire management that are still used today. Number 12. Stealth bomber crashed on takeoff. The B-2 stealth bomber was the costliest aircraft in the Air Force arsenal in 2008. Just 21 of the aircraft were built at that time. Despite its high price, a simple mistake can bring it down. During takeoff in Guam, a faulty sensor in a B-2 caused the plane to stall due to a communication error. It immediately came crashing down, taking with its $1.4 billion worth of assets, because an appropriate technique for dealing with moisture within the engines had not been adequately passed along to the appropriate staff. Water got into the sensor. Luckily, the 2 pilots in the plane were able to safely eject themselves, so nobody was killed in the incident. Number 11. The Copper King Falls. Yasuo Hamanaka was a clever investor with one massive ambition. Despite his shady tactics, Hamanaka achieved success for a time. Though his devious techniques brought him success for a while, they ultimately led to his imprisonment. Copper is a difficult commodity, and the largest copper holders of the world have tiny percentages of the metal. With just 5% shares of the copper of the world, Hamanaka was a major player. However, when copper prices started to fall, his house of cards collapsed. All told, Hamanaka lost $2.6 billion in the course of his copper schemes. Number 10. Sony buys Columbia Pictures. In 1989, Sony made a costly blunder when it bought Columbia Pictures for $4.8 billion. However, after a few years, they would come to regret the acquisition. In 1994, Sony stated that it had no hope of recouping its investment in Columbia due to a number of box office bombs. By then, they had lost almost $3 billion in the deal. Columbia Pictures appears to be on an upswing lately thanks to movies like Skyfall, The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and Men in Black 3. Number 9. Exxon Valdez crash. In 1989, a drunk driver caused the United States' worst oil spill ever. The Exxon Valdez oil spill occurred when Captain Joe Hazelwood crashed the tanker into Prince William Sound. Hazelwood was later convicted of operating the tanker while under the influence and negligent discharge of oil. 11 million gallons of oil were spilt in the accident, affecting 1,300 miles of Alaskan coastline. Wildlife was harmed and fisheries were badly affected. Cleaning up the mess, paying fines, and defending lawsuits cost $4.4 billion in damages. Number 8. Challenger explosion. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger was supposed to launch. It was planned to be the final flight of the Challenger and would have included scientific objectives, as well as satellite deployments. Unanticipated cold temperatures caused a fatal malfunction in this case. The night before the launch, icy weather caused rubber components in the rocket boosters to freeze. The frozen parts did not seal properly, and the Challenger exploded, killing all 7 astronauts on board. The space shuttle had never been tested at temperatures that cold, and sadly this oversight led to 7 lives and $5.5 billion being lost. Number 7. Sinking of Prestige. Despite its illustrious reputation, the Prestige was a rickety oil tanker with 26 years of activity under its wide belt in 2002. While transporting 77,000 metric tons of oil across the Atlantic Ocean, the Prestige was caught in a storm off Spain's coast. The ship began to take on water as a result of the leak, causing engines to shut down. The crew was evacuated because the ship leaked oil into the sea. After several days of discussion and delay, the ship was finally brought into harbor in Spain. The ecological damage, cleanups, and legal costs associated with this event were $6.9 billion. If the ship had been better maintained, it likely would have withstood the storm and the oil spill never would have happened. Number 6. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. 3 nuclear reactors melted down and hydrogen explosions incinerated Tokyo, releasing deadly radiation into the atmosphere as a result of this chain of events. A 2012 investigation revealed that all of these incidents were totally preventable. Unfortunately, stringent regulations for plant maintenance had been overlooked, and disaster struck at Fukushima as a consequence, which was the loss of $12 billion. Number 5. Columbia disintegrated on re-entry. Another spacecraft tragedy that should never have happened is the Space Shuttle 2003 disaster of Columbia, which will go down in history as yet another case of a fatal mistake causes $13 billion loss and lies. The shuttle was destroyed upon re-entry into the atmosphere of the Earth after a piece of foam from the external tanks struck its wing and broke through. All 7 astronauts aboard Columbia perished when it disintegrated. When Columbia took off 16 days earlier, a similar problem with falling foam had occurred, but nothing was done to address it. The loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia prompted NASA to retire the entire Space Shuttle fleet in 2011, and NASA was subjected to harsh public criticism for not doing enough to protect foam on the tank of the shuttle. Number 4. Mercedes-Benz buys Chrysler. In 1998, Mercedes-Benz's parent Daimler-Benz combined with Chrysler in order to forge the 2 firms into a worldwide automobile behemoth known as Daimler-Chrysler. The firm aimed to dominate both continents by having 1 branch in the United States and 1 in Europe. Daimler-Benz acquired Chrysler for $37 billion, but the merger did not endure. The 2 businesses had difficulties in seeing eye to eye due to cultural clashes and differences in quality. Then, during the 2000s, a recession pushed Chrysler sales into the dirt. Daimler-Benz ultimately sold Chrysler in 2007 for $7 billion to Cerberus Capital Management firm, a company whose specialty is restructuring failing corporations. Number 3. Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which took place in the Gulf of Mexico, is considered to be the most catastrophic oil leak in history. Following an incident on the drilling platform, 210 million gallons of oil were spilled. Oil damaged marine and wildlife habitats from Louisiana to Florida, and the leak persisted for months as workers tried time and again to stop it. Finally, it was discovered that BP, the British business responsible for the Deepwater Horizon rigger, had cut corners in terms of safety, with devastating consequences. Cutting corners turned out to be quite expensive for BP. Cleaning up after the accident and paying associated fines and legal costs has saddled the firm with a $61 billion bill. Number 2. AOL buys Time Warner. At number 2, this is an interesting story of $146 billion loss in just few months. In the year 2000, the dot-com bubble was in full swing. AOL was seen as the most innovative technology firm on earth, and the Time Warner merger was pushed to its limits. The purchase of Time Warner by AOL for $182 billion added Time Warner cable services to their already popular home internet packages. Just a few months later, in October 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, causing its value to plummet rapidly. Time Warner split up in 2009 for a valuation of $36 billion. After splitting up with his or her partner, its worth dropped to just $2.5 billion. In 2000, AOL was certain that their reign as the top home internet service would never end, yet it only took a few years for them to be proven horribly wrong. Number 1. Chernobyl disaster. The Chernobyl catastrophe is the deadliest and most deadly nuclear disaster in history. The worst part of it all is that it was caused by simple errors that could have been avoided. On April 25, 1986, a drill to test preparations for a power outage at Chernobyl triggered uncontrolled reactions and a steam fire that burned for 9 days. There were 134 radiation-related illnesses among the workers, and 31 of them died in the following few weeks. 14 of them would later die from cancer. Other than the lives it contained, the money lost $590 billion. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant was operated by a Soviet-designed reactor that was not designed to be used anywhere else in the world. Design flaws in the reactor fueled the disaster, and irreparable damage occurred as a result of this. Well, that is the end of the video. Do let us know what you think in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe the channel. See you again soon.